To order. We're here today's meeting number 17 of the Standing Committee, and we're here today to discuss the main estimates and supplementary estimates C. And I'd like to welcome the Minister and thank him for taking the time to join us. But before we jump into things, there's something else I would like to say, and it's fitting that the Minister is here today. As I'm sure all of us on this call have seen over the last week, that our colleague, Mr. Lefebvre, has decided that he will not be seeking re-election whenever that date happens, probably 2 or 3 years from now. But nonetheless, he has made that decision now. And it also means he's no longer serving as our parliamentary secretary to this minister and to this committee. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank him and express my appreciation on behalf of not only everybody on this committee, but everybody else who's worked with them. Personally, I've been working with them since 2015, and it's been a pleasure, and I am very grateful for everything you've done. So, on that note, we should jump in. Minister, again, thank you very much. I'm very grateful, as are all the members, for you generously providing us with your time today. You and all of your departmental officials as well, who we will have for the second hour. So rather than consume any more time in this first hour when time is so precious, I will spare us my usual speech on all of the rules because everybody here knows them very well. So I will just let you jump in and turn the floor over to you, Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à tous. Je vous parle aujourd'hui de l'île de Terre-Neuve.
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Newfoundland today, the ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. Since the first time that I appeared before this parliamentary committee 3 months ago, the future is even better. Analysts are projecting a prosperous year, and our vaccination campaign is accelerating. Together, we will make it out of this.
Canada's economic recovery. 4 consecutive months of growth in mining, oil, and gas, including 6.1% growth last quarter. Oil prices are rising sharply. Crude oil exports are at pre-pandemic volumes. Lumber is at prices never seen before, the highest that they've ever been at $1,035. The future must not leave any energy worker or any energy producing province like mine behind. And having Indigenous peoples as full participants in resources, including critical minerals that are vital to a low emissions future. Canada is well positioned with our strengthened climate plan, 64 new initiatives, $15 billion for everything from renewable energy and smart grids to retrofits, EVs, and hydrogen. Canada's proud energy workers will help us get there thanks to their ingenuity, their expertise in complex engineering, their huge clean tech investments. Of course, there are challenges. First, we remain unhappy with President Biden's decision to revoke Keystone XL permit. And we made that clear during our recent Canada-US summit, directly and clearly. Second, we are working tirelessly on Line 5. I'll say to this committee what I said to the Canada-US Special Committee. The operation of Line 5 is non-negotiable. People will not be left in the cold. Mais, Monsieur le Président, la relation avec notre client,
Our relationship with our most important client, the United States, runs deeper than a single project or a single energy infrastructure.
Or economies, for that matter, as highly integrated as ours, with shared supply chains, with 70 pipelines, with nearly 3 dozen transmission lines crossing the border. Our American partners understand this simple fact. The U.S. needs Canada. They need our oil and gas. They need our critical minerals. For that reason, the President and the Prime Minister agreed to a roadmap that recognizes the need to protect our highly integrated supply chains and energy infrastructure. Le Président Biden, vous travaillez en collaboration avec notre Premier ministre pour relancer nos économies.
We are working with the Prime Minister and the Premiers to revitalize our economy and to build better as we wait for our initiatives on the climate crisis to go forward. Canada is putting a price on pollution, is going to electrify its system by 2030, is reducing the use of diesel in remote Aboriginal Indigenous communities.
Entry estimates we're discussing today will help us get there. The Mains provide $2.2 billion in this fiscal year. It's an increase of $859 million. Now, a big chunk of that, just under $570 million, goes to the Emission Reduction Fund. This is part of our COVID response plan, which included $750 million over 7 years to reduce onshore and offshore methane emissions. Another $84 million for this year and $309 million for 2021-22 will fund the Home Energy Retrofit Initiative. Part of our $2.6 billion 7-year pledge to help homeowners lower monthly heating bills while doing their part to save the planet, saving money, lowering emissions. Monsieur le Président, nous créons des emplois dans...
Mr. Chairman, we're creating jobs in the forestry sector by implementing nature-based solutions, like planting 2 billion trees over the next 10 years and protecting our forests from insect and pest infestations as well as fire. $83 million has been earmarked in the 2020-21 budget for programs in the forestry sector in order to support innovation and development of new products and processes, particularly in the emerging bioeconomy sector, increasing market opportunities within and outside Canada and encouraging the participation of Indigenous communities and businesses in the sector.
Draw your attention to the $22 million in 2021-22 to fund programs aimed at tapping Northern Canada's mining potential, especially in the area of critical minerals. Mr. Chair, I'm optimistic. We have set a clear path to a low emissions future, and actions like the ones I've outlined today will help us double down on our common mission, net zero emissions by 2050, a national economy that continues to create good jobs, and a low emissions future that leaves no one behind. I know that's a lot, it's ambitious, but we're Canada, and that's what we do. Merci, je suis prêt à répondre à vos questions.
Thank you, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Minister, thank you very much, particularly for staying right on time. Okay, so first at the plate, I believe, is Mr. McLean, who is in the room, if I'm not mistaken. For 6 minutes, sir.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming today and answering the questions on the estimates. And I noticed your testimony last week before the Canada-U.S. Relations Committee, where you were speaking at length about issues facing the energy industry in the country and where we are failing and continue to fail in advancing key infrastructure. But let me ask a pertinent question, because you did relate to it in your speech here, and that was about saving the planet and lowering emissions. And we'll refer back to your speech last week, your testimony you gave, where you said, it's a capitalist country, Canada is. We drive investment, we provide the parameters and the certainty in order to drive investment. It will be the marketplace that makes sure this is a sustainable change to a lower emission future. Well, last week, Chevron Canada decided that their investment in Kitimat LNG, in which they've spent $3 billion over the past 7 years, cannot find a bidder. And that project alone would reduce carbon emissions around the world by about 40 megatons per year. So almost 5% of Canada's emissions alone. And they're withdrawing because they do not see an actual future in Canada where they have transparency on outcome. So when a company like Chevron, in defiance of what you said at the committee last week, is actually saying they don't see a pathway here and nobody else can take their piece off, how can you actually move towards saving the planet by getting these emissions reducing projects built?
Mr. McLean, given recent developments, I have to ask a question, because it's important. Everything that I'm talking about and everything that I'm doing is pertinent to the question that I'm going to ask you, which is, do you believe that climate change is real?
Sorry, Mr. Minister, I think I asked you a question first, but my answer, yes, I believe climate change is real. Thank you.
Good. Okay, good. Because that's not altogether clear after this week.
Well, I think I've been very clear on that, Minister. I think you know that.
Yeah. No, and Mr. McLean, I agree. You have been very clear. It's just with recent developments, it's a pertinent question because it does underline.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Lloyd.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just ask that it's not up to the witnesses, even though they are a minister, and with respect, but it's not up to the witnesses to ask questions to members of our committee. So I just ask that you restore some order here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. I think he was just trying to get clarity on the question. Carry on, Mr. McLean.
And I don't think it's a question anybody should be frightened of.
Sorry, is the question mine, or the minister hasn't answered my question that I posed him yet?
It's your time, Mr. McLean.
Mr. McLean, what I would say is this: market certainty is absolutely the only way that we're going to achieve our climate goals. So where we can provide that certainty, where we can provide that institutional certainty, that's how we will draw investment. I mean, I'm convinced of that. It's the only way to go. It's the reason why we agreed to a price on pollution. It is a reason why we have been transparent about the clean fuel standard. It's a reason why we've been above board on all of these things. And most importantly, when your number one product is going, 98% of it to one customer, and that customer has changed demonstrably its demands on that product, you have to move with it. You don't look at them and say they'd have to be brain dead in order to think the way that they think.
Thank you, Minister. The question's not being answered. I'm asking if you can create the business confidence to actually have companies like Chevron or the replacements actually invest in emission-lowering projects in Canada. If they have no transparency, they're not going to put their money here. Money has left Canada. $200 billion has left Canada under your government's tenure here for good reason. Can you explain that, please?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I think the minister is being, the member is being selective, perhaps, in the investments that he is looking at and the list, and what he's choosing. I mean, I in fact, as I've stated to the member on several occasions, am proud of the fact that we have achieved so much in such a short amount of time. I mean, TMX, we approved it, we're building it. We've got 7,000 jobs that are created so far. And Line 3, we approved it, another 7,000 jobs created. And GTL 2021, we approved it. There are thousands of jobs there being created. Things are being built. Investment is coming in. LNG Canada amongst them. And we will continue down this path because it's working.
Well, thank you. And let's go over those. And I'm glad you raised those, Minister, because TMX was approved before your government came into power. You had to reapprove it because you broke it. You broke it, you bought it. Okay, 7,000 jobs were actually being undertaken with the previous proponent of that project was a private sector proponent who left Canada, and your government had to pay them to leave Canada because you were going to face a NAFTA challenge. So I challenge that you actually have those jobs. I challenge that there's actually investment coming into this country when it's government investment as opposed to private sector investment, which is negative at this point in time. KXL, that's billions of dollars and thousands of jobs that have left Canada. Tech Frontier, again, Minister, I don't know how that failed, but your cabinet, it didn't seem to cross the line, and I do need you to start advocating more for this. My colleagues and I will do anything to help you, Minister. This is a minority government. We'd like you to get these projects over the line to build jobs in Canada and bring investment to Canada. So tell us how we help you get these projects over the line with your cabinet colleagues who don't seem to see things the same way you do when you speak.
Well, I would not agree with that. I think my cabinet colleagues and I are as one, as we should be. But we are very clear that what we want to do, what we need to do, and what the marketplace is demanding that we do is find ways to lower emissions. I have to contest your analysis on TMX. You guys, when you were in government, could not get it built. And one of the things that we have been able to do is embrace jurisprudence, and as I would say, the world as it is and not as we wish it to be, a world in which climate change is a reality, a world in which the courts time and time again had said about TMX that you were not building it the right way and were vetoing it in every step. So if you want to provide the market certainty, you embrace the world as it is because people deal with facts. And the fact was courts time and again were saying that we were not doing it the right way. And goodness knows, we tried on a couple of occasions and finally, though, did land in the right place by making sure that we sat down with respect with Indigenous governments, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in order to make sure good projects get built. They only get built if we do that in a good way.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Weiler, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for coming to join our committee today again to look at the estimates. Minister, in the International Energy's Oil 2021 report, the IEA notes that the pandemic has caused a dramatic downward shift in expectations for oil demand over the next 6 years, and that the downturn has been so sharp in advanced economies with traditionally high vehicle ownership and oil use per capita that demand is not expected to return to pre-crisis levels. And this is also coming from an agency that has been very conservative and has greatly underestimated the rate at which the energy transformation is taking place. So, Minister, what will the new normal look like for the Canadian energy sector, and what is our government doing to prepare for it?
Thank you for the question. I spend an awful lot of time with the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, the executive director, and sit on a special commission that he and I helped set up called the Global Commission on a People-Centered Recovery, which basically comes down to something that I've said before this committee is a priority of mine, is inclusion of energy producing provinces like mine here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the workers who work in the oil industry here in this province, as they do in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But the pandemic has fundamentally changed things. I mean, there are shifts happening here in Canada and around the world and in the markets that point very clear signs. The normal of the past won't be the normal of the future. Lowering emissions, low emitting energy, that's the ballgame. The IEA and their Oil 2021 outlook forecast a dramatic downward shift in expectations for oil demand over the next 6 years. Oil production capacity will slow. Today, we're seeing investment and expansion plans, scale back around the world. One of the few areas where demand will grow will be Asia, which is great news for our investment in TMX. Oil will continue to be part of the mix, but it will be a declining part of the mix. The world is moving in a new direction, and not leaving any energy worker behind means Canada has to be at the forefront of that effort, investing in new technologies, investing in the fuels of the future, carbon capture, hydrogen, biofuels, SMRs, renewables. Like the late Walter Gretzky said, you skate to where the puck is going. That's how we double down on our common mission. That's how we get net zero emissions by 2050. That's how we keep growing the economy, keep a prosperous economy, creating good jobs, and a low emissions future that leaves no one behind. And I emphasize that last point emphatically.
Well, maybe to touch on one of the topics you brought up there, there's been several developments, important developments with respect to hydrogen since you last appeared at our committee. We announced our hydrogen strategy. We've signed a deal with Germany recently on clean energy. We announced a $1.5 billion into the low carbon and zero emissions fuel fund, just to name a few. I know locally in my riding, Carbon Engineering received a large NSERT grant to study water electrolysis. And a company from my riding is pursuing an offshore wind project, a large one that would produce hydrogen through this means as well. So, Minister, given the investments happening around the world in this space, are we prepared to compete internationally and take advantage of the assets, geography, and talent that we have in this country?
That's the essential bit, to be honest with you. I mean, I come from a province, Mr. Waller, where we have, it's one of the great migrations internally in this country. We're in a time when, flights are decreasing, we actually are increasing the number of flights, putting them back into place, direct flights to Toronto from Deer Lake, mainly from Deer Lake, actually, because of the number of workers that we have in rural Newfoundland, particularly, who are flying back and forth every day of every week to work in Alberta and Saskatchewan as rotational workers in the energy industry, and some in BC, but making sure that they come back here because they want to raise their families in Newfoundland. It is a lot of, going back and forth, but we lose some of these workers, and we don't just lose them to, within Canada. I can take that, obviously, but we're losing really high international grade, caliber talent in our energy industry to around the world. So we can't have that. We got to make sure where we can that, government steps in order to make sure we bridge it until the marketplace, I think, takes over in a meaningful way. And it will, I think, in areas like hydrogen. I mean, the hydrogen strategy for Canada, I think it lays the foundation for a huge opportunity and to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. It relies on Canadian expertise throughout the entire value chain to build new hydrogen supply, distribution, and end uses that will support a low carbon energy ecosystem with benefits, I think, that could begin right now. It's strengthening our economic competitiveness, grow export potential, attract investment, create good, sustainable jobs across the country, and drive down emissions in sectors like resource extraction and processing, in freight and transportation and power generation, manufacturing. Big opportunities in the production of steel and cement, where electrification may not be the best choice. So, low carbon, zero emission hydrogen, I think, has the potential to reduce our annual greenhouse gas emissions, potentially by up to 45 million metric tons a year in 2030. Huge potential.
Great. Maybe last question here. In the fall economic statement, there was an announcement of 2.7 billion over 7 years for a home energy retrofit program. As buildings are becoming more and more efficient, we're likely to have a major boom in this space. And I'm wondering, what are we doing as a government to ensure that we have the skilled labor force that's going to be necessary to meet the increased demand for energy efficiency and for green building going forward?
Yeah, one of the reasons we are particularly keen on retrofits, and I think I've told this committee before that when I initially took this portfolio, that was not top of mind for me. But after a couple of briefings, I became a convert. Because if we get home and commercial retrofits right, we'll go about one quarter to one third our way towards our Paris targets, which is phenomenal. And what I like about it, especially having grown up in a small town in Labrador, as Ms. Jones knows, back in my day, whenever federal government came out with a program, it was always something that didn't necessarily affect me. Where retrofits affects the home you live in, it affects the building in which you work. It is inherently local. And so I think we have 84.45 million in subsidy funding, 308.6 million in the mains.
Part of the have to stop you soon, Mr.
Yeah,
Minister, if you can wrap
that's
up.
fine, Mr. Chair. I can get to it later.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a feeling that subject will come up again. Mr. Simard, over to you, sir.
Merci, James. Peut-être.
Thank you. I might just start by thanking Paul, who may be leaving us. I've very much enjoyed working with you, Paul. Thank you for being here, Mr. O'Regan. There's something that always surprises me, and it's the amount of capital that you're ready to invest in the oil sector. I was listening to you answering to a question and you said that you need to be ready to invest in renewable energy and technology, but the document I have in front of me does everything but that. When I look at the Emission Reduction Fund, $560 million, which will be used to support polluters. We are trying to reduce the carbon footprint in the sector that is most damaging to the environment. So I don't understand the rationale underpinning this. We know that the forestry sector is probably best placed to do this. We need to find innovation in bioproducts. But here there's not much in the budget, and yet you're ready to invest $560 million in a program that is going to reduce emissions of the oil and gas sector. There's a simple environmental principle for me. It's polluter pays. In this document, what I'm seeing is the polluter gets paid, not the polluter pays. There's 5 to 1 here. You're investing about 513 million in the oil and gas sector and barely 100 million in the most promising sector, which is forestry. I don't know how you can explain that.
Merci, Monsieur Simard.
Thank you, Mr. Simard.
I and the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change are singularly focused on lowering emissions wherever and whenever we find them. I can see your point, but the fact of the matter is the oil and gas sector is such an important and vital part, predominant part of our country's economy that we cannot simply walk away from it. There is no avoiding the oil and gas sector in this country. We are the 4th biggest producers of oil and natural gas in the world. We have to work with industry in order to lower emissions. We simply have to. And look, but we're committed to phasing out inefficient subsidies by 2025. We're on track to do that. We said we would do it. We're on track to do it. And with a new U.S. administration, there's even more alignment on this. In fact, they're following our lead on banning fossil fuel subsidies. We've already eliminated 8 tax breaks for the fossil fuel sector. We are working with Argentina on a peer review of fossil fuel subsidies that will help us determine what we need to do in order to meet our commitment. Next. And our government will keep working on, with Canadian industry in order to cut emissions across the economy in a practical and affordable way. The Fed's committed $3.16 billion towards partnerships over the next 10 years, working with industry to reduce emissions because it's part of the energy mix for the foreseeable future. I am not one to ignore a massive problem. It is a massive problem. I'm one to work with what is there, the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is climate change is real, and the reality of the situation is we're the fourth biggest producers of oil and gas in the world.
Right, I understand that. But you said that this is a predominant sector in the Canadian economy. This week, we're going to get the report on the LNG project, and this report advises not going ahead with the LNG project. You said it yourself, the oil and gas sector is huge in the Canadian economy, and my fear is to see you supporting that project anyway. In recent days, you've been saying that in your mind, liquid natural gas is a transition fuel. So what I fear is that even if the ABAP had decided against the project, you would support it against what Quebec wanted. So are you going to support it even if the BAP says no?
Mr. Samara, you're referring to Energy Saguenay and the Gazoduc projects. They are currently undergoing a federal assessment by the Impact Assessment Agency. They will do a fair and thorough job based on science, based on evidence, and based on Indigenous traditional knowledge. And I think once we have all the necessary information and analysis, we'll make a decision on the projects then. I think it would be premature for me to say anything other than acknowledge that in case there are some cases where LNG may prove to be a bridge fuel in allowing us to lower emissions now. I had said in Berlin at a conference I attended on last Tuesday with John Kerry, the climate envoy to the president, I will not allow, people talk about the perfect getting in the way of the good. I want the perfect and I want the good. I want it all. I want every project and I will look at anything that will lower emissions now, in the medium term, and in the long term. I will look at everything, and I will analyze every one of those projects with, as I said, threefold mission: lower emissions, net zero by 2050, an economy that continues to prosper and create jobs, and a future that leaves no one behind, no province, no region, not energy workers.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Simard. Over to you, Mr. Kennings.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being with us again today. I know when you were last before us, just before Christmas, we talked about energy retrofits, and the chair is right. This subject is going to come up again, so I just wanted to go back to it. And then I was, I think, thanking your government for actually looking at retrofits and bringing back that home retrofit program, which was so successful before. But I did mention that Efficiency Canada, who's the body that kind of studies this and lives it, says that spending has to be 10 times what it is. And one of the areas, they've come out with a recent analysis on one of the specific areas where it can be much more bold and has to be much more bold, and that's in the area of energy poverty. 20% of Canadians live in households where their energy costs are 6% or more of their income. And these programs are not accessible to lower income homeowners. Efficiency Canada says these people cannot be reasonably expected to pay for the upfront costs required to access later rebates or take on additional debts to do so. So 20% of Canadian households won't be able to access these programs. And these are the people that need it the most. These are often the older, less efficient houses that need retrofitting the most. And so they have put forward what they call a transformative goal to retrofit all homes experiencing energy poverty by 2030. And that would, as I say, cost a lot more money than you're projecting to spend. But they said we should be at least spending on that part of the program what we're spending through your program on retrofitting commercial and residential retrofits for more higher income families. And I'm just wondering if you can pledge today to do that.
I would listen. I think that what we have in the beginning, Mr. Cannings, is an ambitious program. I mean, 7 years, $2.6 billion. As you know, that was announced in the FES, and that's available to homeowners retroactive to December 1st of last year. We've asked people to hang on to their receipts. So I think that will help a lot more Canadians make their homes more energy efficient. I mean, it's a means for homeowners to take real action to fight climate change. And create good jobs in their communities. That's a really important point. The jobs will be created in their communities, and I think efforts are already underway to get the initiative up and running quickly to roll out the funding for energy assessments and retrofit grants. Could we expand on it? To your point, absolutely. But we're off to a running start. I mean, we're laying the foundation. We're building a national web portal where homeowners can get informed. They can coordinate with local retrofit programs. They can submit a claim. They can secure reimbursement. It's all going to be part of the launch coming up. And the funding will see as many as 700,000 Canadians benefit from the grants of up to $5,000 for retrofits, supported by EnerGuide energy assessments. We're also investing to recruit and train up to 2,000 new EnerGuide energy advisors to conduct energy assessments. So those will be, new middle-class jobs targeted to reflect Canada's diverse workforce as well. And we're going to be announcing, we also announced, I should say, that we're going to be further spending in that area by making homes more energy efficient, providing access to low-cost loans. I think you and I speak to the same people on this. There is an incredible amount of energy and enthusiasm. We want to be very ambitious. We are laying the foundation. Could it grow further? Absolutely.
I think I'll switch now. You just mentioned inefficient subsidies in your last answer. And you pledged to get rid of inefficient subsidies, but when we had the Environment Commissioner before us a couple of years ago at this committee, she basically said she couldn't find out if you were getting rid of inefficient subsidies because your government hadn't yet defined what inefficient was, what an inefficient subsidy was. So I wonder, first of all, have you defined what an inefficient subsidy was? And you also mentioned the bilateral program with Argentina to audit those subsidies. I was in Argentina when that was announced with Minister Carr in 2018. And I just wonder what the timeline is on that. That was 3 years ago.
That's a good question. That's a specific question that, I'm going to put him on the spot, my Associate Deputy Minister, Sean Tupper. And Sean, if you are there, perhaps you could shine some light on the timeline on Argentina and their review, the peer review of fossil fuel subsidies. Sean?
It's been a slightly slower project than we'd originally anticipated because, not surprisingly, COVID has prevented some of the advancement of our work. But indeed, it is a priority for us. We are working with the Department of Finance in this regard to make sure that we are able to advance this file as fast as possible. I don't have a specific date in terms of when that work will be completed, but we'd be pleased to come back to the committee with that information.
Yeah, we'll update the committee.
You're on mute, Mr. Cannings.
How are we doing, Mr. Chair, for time? Or?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Okay, and I just wanted to repeat the question about can you define what an inefficient subsidy is?
Sean, I'll ask you about that.
I think for the government, the desire is to move away from subsidies that are just direct supports to the industry. I think that where the government has gone in terms of its priority is indeed to look at working with industry, working with the provinces and territories. So when funding is put into question, that it is focused on cleaning up of the industry. It is about producing the cleanest LNG. It is about reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of a barrel of oil as it's produced. And so those are the kinds of investments that the government is looking for. It is about a change of how we transform the energy sector and moving away from traditional forms of subsidy and support to those that reflect what the government projects in terms of the energy transformation and what our future energy mix will look like.
Thank you, Mr. Tupper, and thank you, Minister. Mr. Kennings, thank you. Okay, we're now moving into the 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Zimmer, who I believe is also in the room.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. We've seen previously, when I questioned Minister Ng about a softwood lumber agreement, whether that had been a conversation between the Prime Minister, Minister Ng, and the Biden administration, and she evaded the question. Clearly, it hadn't been discussed. What are you actually doing to fight for our forest industry?
Well, we've got $2 million in funding right now, 1.5, I think, in Sub-C, and then another $500,000 in existing funding, with another $2 million in 2021 in the main estimates. And that allows us to provide the economic analysis and the industry intelligence and provide expert advice to GAC as they sit at the negotiating table with the U.S. administration. And the ultimate objective is to eliminate U.S. duties on Canadian softwood lumber and to achieve a long-term managed trade agreement. In December 2020,
I agree
we had the first administrative review of softwood lumber duties,
Minister, my time
lowering the duty rates.
It's only 5 minutes, so I respect that you're bringing up the softwood lumber agreement in your discussions, but I want to see a minister that's pounding his fist on the table, fighting for our forest sector and fighting for our LNG and our natural gas and fossil fuel sector in Canada. And I'm not seeing that. I read an article that talks about, it's from BBC, President Biden's side, the White House statement about the call said, this is about the Prime Minister between him and the President. The President acknowledged Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's disappointment regarding the decision to rescind the permit, but reaffirmed that his commitment to maintain an active bilateral dialogue and to further deepen cooperation with Canada. That doesn't sound like a Prime Minister that's pounding the table fighting for our sector, our natural resource sector in Canada. I just don't see it. And then we see the announcement with Chevron. They're pulling out, which should be one of the golden eggs in our natural resource sector in Canada. And we're not seeing a pound of the fist on the table fighting for that industry. It has the potential to lower emissions around the globe, Minister, as hopefully you know. And if you're so voracious about reducing our carbon outputs, you think that you'd be defending that LNG sector around the world, pounding your fist on the table, defending us. I come from an area in northern BC where the workers actually go do the work to find the natural gas and produce it and get it to market. How are you fighting for our sector? How are you fighting for Canadians in the natural gas sector in our nation?
I am not pounding on tables. I am working closely with unions and prospective investors to get it done. And that is ultimately how I think people should gauge the results. Some may look at it and say, we're failing. I do not believe that. Things are getting constructed. Investment is coming in. But I have to say, it is difficult when we send mixed signals, right? That is very difficult. So we have to be very clear on what it is we want, which is to confront a real problem, which is climate change, by lowering emissions, but ensuring that when we do that, that our economy continues to prosper and people continue to have good jobs, right? And that there are no regions, namely Alberta, Saskatchewan, and mine, traditional oil and gas producing provinces, that are left behind in that. We will never achieve our goals by leaving Canadians behind. And I have been utterly adamant about that from this room here in St. John's, where I speak to people all over the country and all over the world.
Minister,
very clear about where we stand.
Frankly, though, with Chevron deciding to cease And I'll read part of their statement. At this time, it's Chevron's intent to cease Chevron-funded further feasibility work for the proposed Kitimat LNG project. So if you're not pounding your fist on the table, something's not working. When we had how many projects and LNG projects along our coastline of British Columbia that could actually lower global emissions, this could be a great story for Canada. And thankfully, LNG Canada is still on track. And I know about the project. It's going relatively well, and hopefully we can get that gas to the markets in Asia where it's much needed to offset some of those higher polluting fuels and energy. But Minister, if Chevron, such a good project like Chevron, is deciding to cease further sustainability studies, something's wrong, and you might need to start pounding your fist on the table. I would ask on behalf of all, and you didn't mention British Columbia in your statement. You talked about Saskatchewan, Alberta, and your home province. BC, we have a huge natural resource sector in the province. It's very significant to our provincial bottom line and to people's meals on their tables and roofs over their heads. We're asking you to fight for our industry.
Mr. Zimmer, if you could stop now, allow him some time to answer the question, or I'm going to have to start pounding my fist on the table. Minister, can you answer briefly?
Yeah, no, Mr. Zimmer, you're absolutely right. BC, I did not leave out of on purpose. I mean, certainly in our $1.7 billion on orphan and inactive wells, BC is very much a part of that. So certainly not. And when I say pound the fist on the table, you may not see me do it. You know, in the real sense, in the metaphorical sense, I am absolutely banging my fist on the table. I told the forestry industry that very clearly in my first week as minister, that they were looking for a champion, and they have one in me.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Mr. May, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing before us here today. I for one, want to encourage you to continue the approach that you have been taking. I mean, standing on a soapbox and screaming bloody murder or pounding fists on tables may make for good talking points and good politics, but it isn't necessarily outcomes focused, and that's really what we need to do is keep our eye on the prize and focus on getting the job done. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. My questions today, Minister, are going to probably not be of any surprise to you. I get to represent a riding that is heavily invested in the nuclear industry. Cambridge has companies like BWXT, ATS, and I was very pleased to see our friend and colleague Wayne Long announce over $50 million in funding from the Government of Canada to develop spent fuel recycling technology and a molten salt reactor in St. John, New Brunswick. Can you inform this committee about how the recycling of spent fuel is key to the nuclear energy sector and the potential around small modular reactors?
I will do that, Mr. May. I'll actually contest you on one point that you made, and that was standing on a soapbox and banging your chest, thumping your chest makes for good politics. It doesn't even make for good politics. You don't achieve anything. If it did achieve something, then 10 years of it under the Harper government would have gotten a pipeline to Tidewater. It didn't. We are managing right now to build one with TMX. We've built Line 3 on our side and NGTL, which will allow Transall to close its coal properties and operate on natural gas. These are huge and seminal projects that we are getting built. Now, on nuclear and SMRs, great potential. Our investment is $50 million to Moltex. We announced that last week, and that demonstrates that we are what we think of that promise. Supporting SMR research and technology development in New Brunswick, supporting workers and technology that can produce non-emitting energy and reduce the storage of waste. So yeah, it's a stable salt reactor. It produces emissions-free energy through a process recycling existing used nuclear fuel to produce energy. It can be a first of its kind system. It shows Canada's leadership, I think, as a tier one nuclear nation, which is a point I've been making, that when you're tier one and the world is looking to your regulatory as world leading, you don't want to surrender that advantage. So we have a plan to advance the safe and responsible development and deployment of SMRs, and that's only through partnership with provinces, territories, Indigenous peoples, labor, industry. Number of provinces, obviously, not just New Brunswick, but Ontario and Alberta and Saskatchewan have already professed their support. And again, it's all about lowering emissions. So if SMRs can help us do that, we are going to look long and hard at them. We know there are strong feelings about nuclear energy, especially the question of waste. The health and safety of Canadians and the environment when it comes to nuclear is of critical importance. My department launched an engagement process to modernize Canada's radioactive waste policy, and we've been engaging, and I personally, with a lot of Canadians who've had very strong opinions on this, including Indigenous peoples and waste producers and others. Our determination going through those consultations is to get it right.
Thank you, Minister. I think I only have about a minute left, so very quickly, what's next, specifically for SMRs? What do you think will need to be the next step in getting to that ultimate goal?
So we're investing in models that have strong potential to work and tick off a lot of boxes for us. Namely that they are safe. The Moltex model that we're investing in particularly intriguing because of its way of dealing with the waste issue. But Canada has such a huge advantage in the nuclear field globally, and we are really looked upon as being experts not just in the technology but in our regulatory capacity. You do not squander an advantage like that. We want to get SMRs up so that we can have a working model, and then that will probably occur at what we would call a brownfield site, probably associated with a nuclear reactor, where we can test them out there and see how it goes. A number of these things, that potential, we always have an eye to make sure that we are not wasting the Canadian taxpayers' dollars. But there is real and significant potential here that would be instrumental. We believe between 2030 and 2050. We're not going to see SMRs up and operating in a tangible way that will allow us to meet our 2030 targets, but they could be absolutely essential between 2030 and 2050. So now's the time to make sure that we keep the Canadian advantage.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. May. Mr. Smart for 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You said in one of your answers that you had met with people in the forest industry and that you wanted to be a champion for the forest industry. I do like to hear that, but how is that going to translate into action? In the budget, I see 39.3 million for processing in the forest industry. We know that the shift to a bioeconomy costs a lot, so I fear you're not sending a serious message to the forest industry with this amount. I would also point out, Mr. O'Regan, that the forest industry, well, most of the stakeholders in it, don't have any access to the DEC program. They would need to apply to global affairs given the conflicts or disputes, rather, with the U.S., and they rarely qualify. The only source of funding for the industry, therefore, is what we're seeing in front of us, and that's insufficient. When I see what you're ready to invest in the emission reduction fund, you've said that oil and gas is a predominant sector of the industry, but isn't there some adjustment that could be met here to strike a better balance between the resources allocated to oil and gas and to forestry?
Merci, Monsieur Simard. It's important, I would say, not to take for granted our commitment to 2 billion trees. I have said time and again, there's no path to net zero that doesn't involve our forests. We have, I don't need to tell you, but I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves that we have the forest ecosystems that support the well-being of Canadians and also absorb carbon pollution. They lower emissions. So we're finalizing a solution for planting those trees. We're working with ECCC. We're working with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and an initiative of this is a huge scale. This is very ambitious what we're doing in forests. It requires strong partnerships right across Canada to succeed. So we have and we will continue to work with provincial and territorial governments and Indigenous peoples and industry and non-governmental stakeholders to make sure that we realize this commitment. And we are committed to using nature-based solutions to fight climate change. 2 billion trees over the next 10 years to clean our air, to clean our water, to make our communities greener. Forest innovation, expanding market opportunities, and indigenous investments. We are putting a lot of money into this because it's very clear, to your point, that it will work.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Simard. Mr. Canning, to you for 2.5 minutes.
No.
Well, thank you. And I think I'll pick up on where Mr. Weiler was some time ago, talking about the need for training for people to do all this work in going back to the energy retrofits in buildings. In my riding in my hometown of Penticton, we have Okanagan College, which has a sustainable building program that I think is considered the best in the country. Just wondering if you can expand on what your government is planning to do to support those programs so that we have the technicians and the builders that know these ways of doing these retrofits best to achieve the best efficiency, and so that we are doing this as efficiently as possible, I guess, if you could say that.
Mr. Cannings, I would say, watch this space. We are hoping to announce something very soon on training. You're absolutely right. It's essential. We do not yet have the auditors in this country that we will need for the ambitious targets that we are setting for ourselves. So we need, in very short order, to increase the number of auditors that are available in this country. One thing I will say about our new program, and as I said, it'll be unveiled shortly, it's one of the few government programs that I've seen that really enables people with phones. So that you can take a picture of your receipt, you can FaceTime with your auditor, you can walk around your house and allow them to inspect by FaceTime. Now, at some point, there will actually be a physical audit that that will take place, but this will allow us to save a lot of time. And in the meantime, you are still creating jobs in local communities. You need people in the community who can firsthand assess these things. But there are a couple of steps along the way in which we can use technology and just use people's phones. So the proof will be in the pudding, as you know. But we hope to have answers to that question very soon. We are keenly aware that we need to have the people in order to conduct the audits and assessments.
Thank you. And if I have time, just for another quick question. Okay, and that is on line 5. We've talked about how important it is for jobs and the industries in Ontario. The other flip side of that, what about is concern for the environment. Just wondering how you are pressing Michigan and the United States, not only to keep line 5 going, but also to preserve the environment of the Great Lakes.
Very quickly, Minister.
Very quickly, I would just say we are working on all fronts. We are working with the embassy in the United States. We are working with Joe Comartin, the Consul General, who's out of Detroit. We are working, hand in glove with affected provinces and territories. I continuously brief my caucus members in affected areas, and I'm in constant touch with Ms. Gladder, the MP, and with Mayor Bradley, as well, very importantly, with labor unions who have brothers and sisters on the other side of the border who are also deeply concerned about this. So on every front, we are battling for line 5. Line 5 is non-negotiable.
Thanks, Mr. Thanks, Mr. Cannings. Okay, Mr. Patzer for 5 minutes, and then we will wrap up with Mr. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for being here today, Minister. I want to start with by making sure that we all understand something that you said recently about our relationship with the U.S. Mm-hmm. And I'm just quoting you from your last committee appearance with the Canada-U.S. Committee. There is more alignment now than there ever has been before, not only in terms of the goals of the government of Canada, but also in terms of the goals of the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan too. So I'm just curious, do you really believe what you just said there?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just wondering why, because the American administration on day one came out swinging and attacking against the main industry of our two provinces. Mm-hmm. Not to mention that there is a court challenge on the constitutionality of the carbon tax of your government by the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. So forgive me if I don't believe you. Are you sure you really, truly believe that?
Yes, I absolutely do.
Okay, thank you for that.
And I'll tell you why. The provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan believe in the reality of climate change. and understand that that is the way in which investors are moving, and that if we don't get ahead of it, we will lose out. They also have a clear understanding of the fact that whether we like it or not, Canada's #1 export, which is crude oil, goes to really one customer, and that's the Americans. And they have a new administration and a new way of doing things. Now, I'm a big believer in the marketplace, and in most instances, the customer's right. And if the customer isn't right, then you got to make sure, regardless, that you please the customer. Our oil is utterly dependent on an American market.
So you're willing to capitulate to the wills of the U.S. president, then, is what you're saying?
I don't call it capitulation. I call it making sure that we have a thriving oil and gas industry in this country that continues to lower emissions. They need a customer. That's the reality. I'm in the business of dealing with reality, like the reality of climate change and the reality of a marketplace that is able, with the right incentives, to manage it and to meet the marks that it needs to meet. And I can tell you that the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan have come an awfully long way in making sure that we meet those market realities, because the market has changed, and it is changing in an accelerated fashion. And that if we want to continue to draw investment into our energy sector in this country, we have to deal with that. We do not bury our heads in the sand and yet physically find a way to still beat our chests. That is not how you draw investment in this country. It is dealing with reality, and climate change is a reality.
Okay, Minister, do you know how many barrels of oil Enbridge Line 5 carries per day? Do you know how many barrels of oil a day Enbridge Line 5 carries?
Sir, I'll be honest. I want to have a meaningful conversation with somebody who believes in the reality of what is going on this planet.
If you answer my question, then we'll find out where we're at with this conversation. Do you know how many barrels of oil a day Enbridge Line 5 carries? Yes or no?
Do you believe in climate change?
Do you know how many barrels of oil Enbridge Line 5 carries every day?
None of these questions or answers mean a whit.
I'm asking
if we
you
do not
a question.
All agree
You're here
that
to answer our
questions.
questions. You answer my question. How many barrels a day does Enbridge Line 5 carry? How many barrels a day? How many barrels a day?
I think you've answered mine.
How many barrels a day? So you clearly don't know. And I'll tell you.
Let me tell you, sir.
Because you don't know.
Let me tell you,
Minister,
sir.
Mr.
Pastor, allow him to
answer
answer the question. It's
no.
One person at a time.
No. I'm not going for these, gotcha questions at all.
Well, it's not a gotcha question. It's a pretty simple one. The answer is over 500,000 barrels a day. And let me tell you something. 500,000 barrels a day.
Mr. Patzer, you ask a question, allow him to answer it. If
he said he wasn't going to answer it.
For no other reason, out of respect for the interpreters.
It's a simple question. Do you know how many barrels a day? I gave you the answer. Did you hear it?
Tell me the point of this again. So you've answered your own question.
Okay, no. You're trying to delay my time. I'm not going to accept that. So the answer is very simple. It's 500,000. And the reason why I wanted you to know that is it's the equivalent of more than 9 fully loaded trains with 110 cars carrying oil each. What do you prefer? A pipeline that carries oil, or do you prefer having 9 trains carrying 110 cars per day across this country into Ontario? Is that what you prefer?
I would.
Because it gets back to about respecting the environment.
I have been, I don't know who you're asking the questions to, sir. I have been extraordinarily clear about how hard we are fighting on Line 5, that it is non-negotiable.
How many phone calls have you made personally? How many phone calls have you made?
I'm on the phone all the time, talking to people about the reality of climate change and talking to people about how important Line 5 is to the energy security of this country. I make calls every day of the week and have ever since this became, I guess, the lightning rod that it has. And I have to take these threats seriously because hundreds of thousands of homes, not only in our country, but in the United States, depend on Line 5.
Thank you.
Is climate change a reality?
And realize that,
Mr. Patzer, that's all your time, but thank you very much.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Okay. Mr. Sidhu, over to you for 5 minutes, and then the minister will have to.
Thank you to the Minister for being with us here today. I'll just get right into it. Minister, last year you announced a $750 million emissions reduction fund with the goal of reducing our GHG emissions and putting our energy sector workers back to work. It's a great announcement when both Elizabeth May and Jason Kenney congratulate you for it. Can you update the committee on the work you've done since you announced it and where the $569 million in the mains will be invested this coming fiscal year?
Yeah, so I mean, very clear, and I'm quite attuned to this because I come from an energy producing province, and in fact have been working on the energy file for some 25 years ago anyway, when we were dealing with a generic royalty regime for our offshore here. Energy and associated projects is provincial jurisdiction. That was the very clear and firm lesson that I learned from Minister Savage upon my first meeting with her the day after I was, 2 days after I was sworn in. So you have to work with provinces in order to make sure that this occurs. And the reason why we chose orphan and inactive wells to make sure that we had that the workers that were in place who we knew were immediately displaced by demand destruction. I'm talking about a year ago. You'll recall when the price of a barrel of oil went to negative 35. I've got an app on my phone called Oil Price Watch, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I think anybody else involved in the industry who cares about it remembers that day very well. Our first concern right away was workers. Because you need to make sure that you look after them. And secondly, this, as I keep saying, this isn't a charitable endeavor. These are some of the most experienced people with the highest level of expertise in the country. We can't afford to lose them as we change track and try to and lower emissions. My challenge is to workers in my province, in Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC, to Mr. Simmer's point, is always the same. I mean, within a generation, we figured out how to take oil out of sand to become the 4th biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. That is a phenomenal feat. That is a phenomenal feat. And we need that same ingenuity and level of expertise to take on our new challenge, which is to lower emissions to ensure that the energy sector of this country continues to thrive. Otherwise, investment will pour out. And that requires government having to work with unions. It requires government having to work with provincial governments, and it requires government having to work with the oil and gas industry in order to make sure that we lower emissions wherever and whenever we can find them. So we are working while orphan and inactive wells is a program that we could see that was working in British Columbia and in Alberta and Saskatchewan in a more modest fashion. It was something like that. Why create some new federal program when you have provincial programs that are up and running, and we can fund that capacity on the ground, fund increased capacity, and fund more projects. We did the same out here with the offshore, finding comparable projects, again respecting the jurisdiction of the province, coming together with a package of some $400 million to lower emissions and to train up workers so that they continue to lower emissions. Ultimately, that's the goal. And that is how we build. That is the new challenge to an energy sector that has faced challenges before, and workers that have faced challenges before and have been up to the task. In a generation, becoming the 4th biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. And we can lead the world now in lower emissions in our energy sector. No question.
Thank you for that, Minister. And Minister, my last question to you is, our friends in the Conservative Party had a policy convention this past weekend where their party membership voted against saying climate change is real. They voted against saying the Conservative Party is willing to act on climate change. Minister, I know, and Canadians know that this is wrong. For the benefit of our Conservative friends, though, why are they wrong, and what is your department doing to address
Point of order,
change?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Zimmer, yeah, was that you?
No, it's Mr. McLean.
Sorry, Mr.
Just
McLean, go ahead.
To my honourable colleague on the other side of the House, he obviously did not see the resolutions that were there, and our party is firmly behind climate change and doing what we need to do, as opposed to the virtue signaling that would be represented by this government.
This is not a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Yeah, I understand your point. Mr. Sidhu, finish your question and we can wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. For the benefit of our Conservative friends, Minister, why are they wrong, and what is your department doing to address climate change?
It's not for people who understand the reality of climate change to defend that position. That ship has sailed. The question is really for those who don't believe in climate change, the facts of it, why they don't. It's not for me to defend that. But I will say is that the signal that it sends out to international markets that the 2nd biggest political party in our House of Commons does not believe in the reality of climate change does nothing for the investment community, does nothing for increased investment in this country.
Point of order.
Absolutely none.
Thank you, Minister. I think we're out of time anyway, Mr. Lloyd, so
okay.
I suspect your point of order is now moot. Minister, thank you. Mr. Sidhu, thank you for your questions, and congratulations to you, Mr. Sidhu. neglected to mention that when I gave you the floor. We're all very happy for you. Minister, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your patience. And we look forward to seeing you next time you come before this committee. But I understand that you have to go, but your officials are kind enough to stick around for another half hour for some further questions. So thank you, Minister.
Thank you all for your time and for the excellent questions. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we can carry on. We have 6 departmental officials here. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to not take time to introduce everybody. We've had the pleasure of dealing with all of you many occasions before, so we'll just continue on. And Mr. Lloyd, you have the floor, sir, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. The minister's lucky that he got away because I had some good questions for him too. But
I'm not
I will
sure
ask,
he'd feel the same way.
Well, that's for him to say. And the officials here are here. Not sure exactly which official. So the first one to answer. My question is can we name any significant bilateral victories for Canada vis-a-vis the United States in terms of our natural resource sector in the past couple of years?
I would point to critical minerals as a pretty significant success in terms of our dialogue and our engagement with our American counterparts. I think that we moved very quickly with the former administration to establish a working group. I think we've been able to identify areas of common interest. We've begun to work with industry. We've done work between our labs in terms of identifying areas of success. So I would say that that's a really great example. Nuclear would be another area where we've established a table with our American colleagues and are advancing work with respect to uranium, with respect to small modular reactors. On the regulatory front, that has been quite significant for us because it is a component of what keeps Canada at the forefront of the small modular reactor file, just as an example. Regulation at large, I think, is another area where the alignment of our regulation and the work that we've been doing with our American friends as we look at, those over 100 pieces of infrastructure across electricity and oil and gas infrastructure, where I think we've really benefited Canada by finding that alignment and looking at kind of the North American footprint. So those would be elements, I think, of where we have a really successful relationship with our American colleagues, particularly on the government front.
Well, it sounds like, I can appreciate that is important work, but it sounds like, this is a lot of, planning for future success, which, we all know is essential. But I'm wondering, has there anything in the past couple of years that the government could say, we got this done and this directly is now leading to benefits for Canada?
Well, as I say, I think keeping the border thin, the advancement of a common regulatory framework is crucial to industry. Avoiding the barriers and making sure that industry has a transparent operational framework in which they can engage is fundamental to their survival.
Well,
and their ability
if your argument is that the status quo is a victory, I don't think Canadians will be generally enthused by that. Like, what has been advanced, that has created an positive impact for Canada?
Well, again, I would say the work we're doing on nuclear. I mean, we anticipate up to $300 billion marketplace on the small modular reactor side. The
I
work we're doing with Westinghouse.
I appreciate that, but that's great in the future. In the future, yes, in the future, we'll get hundreds of billions of dollars in the future. But I'm just wondering, can you point out any successes within the past couple of years that our government has achieved to create a real impact for industries and natural resources in our country?
Well, I think on the forestry side, the softwood lumber administrative review is a component, and I think we stand ready to engage with our American counterparts. It takes two to get to that table, but I do think on the softwood lumber front, we continue to have a large degree of success in the disputes that arise. So I think that would be a critical element of success.
What would you define as success in these disputes?
Well, I think when we have reviews and whatnot, and the outcomes favor, the Canadian position, I think those are successes. We can't always control how the Americans react to some of those decisions and some of the things that we do. But I think that those are elements where we're using the tools that are available to us to advance Canada's positions, and we seem to be pretty successful in doing that. And those are things that we just have to keep.
So you're saying is we're successful at arguing our cases. We're winning some of the disputes, which, yes, I think is important. But has this resulted in any action that has benefited our industry?
Well, I think our paper industry would say that they've been able to continue to sell into a marketplace. We continue to sell lumber into the marketplace. I think those are components of success that we've managed to advance Canada's interests, and as I say, keep that border thin, keep it open, and allowing Canadian industry to compete in the North American marketplace. Equally,
I appreciate what you said.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. That's all your time. We are on to Ms. Jones for 5 minutes. I understand your camera's not working, but we can hear you. So please go ahead. Your mute is on. You turn, yeah.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I've had the best IT people working on my system, but unfortunately my video is still not working. I want to welcome the officials that are before the board today and to thank them for the work they do on behalf of all Canadians in promoting both the energy and mining sector in Canada. Obviously, I live in Labrador, so I'm next door to some huge rare earths findings and a relatively new mineral development. And so my questions today are somewhat geared around that and what we're doing to help, I guess, incentivize the industry itself, what we're doing to help those companies innovate around rare earths in Canada. From many of the discussions that I've heard, there's very little experimental labs. To do the kind of testing they need to do is very expensive, and so is the extraction technology. So I'm wondering if the officials could kind of bring me up to speed on what the future direction is around this particular commodity and where we're going in supporting these companies.
Thanks for that question. I think that the Canada Metals and Minerals Plan is kind of the foundational piece of kind of what provides us with guidance, and the importance of that is that it was done in partnership with the provinces and territories. And so I think that we've been trying to build a consensus in terms of approach. As you can imagine, many of the elements of the regulatory framework and the oversight of the sector lies under the jurisdiction of provinces and territories. But I think through the partnership that we've been able to establish, we've been able to look at regulatory issues, and we're certainly looking at where government programming at the provincial, territorial, and the federal level can come together to incent different kinds of investments. And certainly on the rare earth elements side of things, we have been using the CanMet laboratories on the mining side to look at extraction technology and to help industry advance its ability to better extract, more efficiently extract, and to reduce costs for those extractions. So we've been able to make contributions there, and a lot of the work that we're doing on the geoscience side, I think, has been something that industry relies on in terms of their ability to make sound investment decision. So I mean, there's a whole lot of work that we do across the board. I think for Canada, we have the very fortunate sort of situation where we can look at 100%. Theoretically, we can look at 100% value chains in Canada. We have the minerals in the ground. We have world-class, world-leading mining companies that can extract that material from the ground, and we have the manufacturing and the capacity to turn that into high-value goods, goods that go into wind turbines, photovoltaics, batteries, small modular reactors. So it is really for us now, working with industry, working with our governments of other jurisdictions to make sure that Canada kind of continues in its world-leading role on the mining side.
Thank you. Did I lose you?
No,
No.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. If I have time, I'd also like to ask a quick question with regard to the clean growth agenda that's been launched by the department and by the government of Canada. As you know, I represent northern regions in Canada where we're not just seeing many communities being highly dependent upon diesel generation, but we're seeing a lot of mining in companies as well. So, you know, if we're really going to cut emissions, we need to be able to reduce that reliance on diesel and other fossil fuels, both in the communities and across the industry. Can you speak today as to what incentive programs are out there to make this happen and what we're doing with mining companies right now in partnership with them to encourage them to become less reliant on diesel generation in northern regions of Canada?
To Molly Johnson, who's our Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for this area, but indeed working with Indigenous communities, remote communities, mining companies and mining communities have been a big feature of the work that we've been doing to look at electrification and alternative fuels. But pardon me, Molly, maybe you could jump in and talk about CERC and some of our specific programs.
Very, very quickly, if you can.
Very quickly, and good morning, everybody. So the Strength and Climate Plan included a number of measures, 64 of them. In that, we've spoken specifically about the off-diesel programming. So that's something that came in under budget 2017. And so these main estimates include about $60 million so that we can continue to do off-diesel programming. So that's helping communities get onto cleaner electricity sources, cleaner power sources. That is funding that there's an additional $300 million in the Strength and Climate Plan that we'll be looking to move forward on that. So, you know, that's just part of the funding that we'll be looking at moving forward. Like it complements clean fuels, electricity work, but it's specifically focused on our Indigenous community work, and there's capacity building in there as well. Mr. Chair, I'm mindful I don't have too much time, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, great. I appreciate it. Okay, over to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, James.
Thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Tupper, there's something that made me raise my brows a few moments ago. When you said you'd had a number of successes with softwood lumber, that there would be some administrative reassessments. But from what I'm hearing, prices are very high at the moment. It's a bubble, but those prices won't stay up. What I'm hearing from the industry is that, first of all, the liquidity access program isn't meeting the requirements of stakeholders. You have to be pretty much in technical bankruptcy to have access to those funds. Secondly, even forest producers who have clients in Canada alone are not able to ask for financial support. They have to go through Global Affairs Canada, and they're constantly turned away. So what I'm hearing from people in the industry is that quite often the department just isn't there. That's the impression most of them have. So could you explain something about that, please?
Well, I think that we across the board, if you're talking about the kinds of supports that we offer as a department to the industry, I think, again, I would make reference to the Forest Innovation Program, the Expanding Market Opportunities Program, investing in forest innovation. Like, those are all elements of things that the department does offer and that industry is able to take advantage of. It is true that as the market is fairly good for components of the forest sector and prices are very high, it's counterintuitive counterintuitive in the sense of the kind of programming government might offer by way of financial support, because in fact the sector right now is doing fairly well. The fact that programming exists at the Department of Global Affairs, I mean, we take very much a whole of government sort of approach to these things, and I think that we work very closely with Global Affairs in making sure they have a good understanding of our industry, of the sector, and that the decisions that they are making through their programming is consistent with the market realities. In terms of the international component, you know, examples of where Global Affairs has kind of led the charge for us and where we succeeded is, you know, the reduction of the tariffs from 20% to 8%. And again, those are elements where we rely on other partners within the federal family, in this instance, Global Affairs, to make sure that we are defending the interests of our force sector.
Merci. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. I don't have much time. In the main estimates, we see 560 million.
Mr. Simard, unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop you there. That was all your time. Mr. Canning's over to you for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to bring up a topic the minister mentioned in the previous hour in response to a question about SMRs and nuclear energy. He mentioned the molten salt reactor project in New Brunswick, where the federal government is giving $50 million to a British firm to develop an SMR that extracts plutonium from the used uranium fuel at the Point Lepreau reactor. And this is somewhat Orwellianly called recycling, even though it's only extracting 1% of the nuclear fuel. It extracts plutonium, leaves a large liquid, highly radioactive waste stream that's very difficult to deal with. And plutonium, I mean, Pierre Elliott Trudeau banned the extraction of plutonium from used uranium fuels because of this danger, because also plutonium is used in nuclear weapons. Canada has been advocating for the fissile materials cutoff treaty, and yet here we are creating more fissile materials. And I'm just wondering, what sort of plan does the government have in dealing with these materials? This is far, far more dangerous than the materials we are already having trouble finding a home for in the nuclear waste management space. So just wondering what the government is planning to do about and why they're even considering extracting plutonium from these materials.
Well, I think partly we are looking in the space of small modular reactors. We're looking at new technologies. These aren't traditional technologies. And so understanding and allowing them to test out and demonstrate how they might work and how they might contribute to our energy mix is critical. And so we have been working to find those technologies that we think have the opportunity to compete in a global market space for SMRs. We have launched, as you may be aware, a policy review of our nuclear waste. It is a 20-year-old policy framework, and so we are looking to modernize that and have been engaged for some time now, working with civil society, Indigenous communities to address questions in terms of our way forward. And that has included moving beyond kind of our traditional questions in terms of looking at spent CANDU fuel, but is anticipating, and we want to make sure that the new policy framework allows us to anticipate what those demands may be for different kinds of fuel that small modular reactors may use. And we've involved our nuclear regulator in that front, and of course, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Okay, over to Mr. McLean for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I start, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, please. And it's been forwarded to the clerk that the committee invite the Minister of Natural Resources to appear for the main estimates for a minimum of 2 hours at the earliest convenience, but no later than May 14th, 2020. So I'll submit that, and the clerk has that just recently. We'd like to talk to the minister more about it.
Okay, I haven't seen the motion. This is something you submitted today, I take it?
Just a minute ago or 5 minutes ago.
All right. Okay.
Thank you. And I'll ask the officials a question here about the revenues and expenses associated with the department going forward here. revenues, of course, we're looking at the natural resources industry. Primarily, the main economic rent driver in the natural resources industry is the oil and gas industry. And in round numbers, over the last 20 years, we've had about $25 to $30 billion per year that goes as economic rent to governments from the oil and gas sector. 25 million is a net, 25 billion is a net number. And it doesn't include linear rents to municipalities nor excise taxes paid on the consumption of their resources. If you look at increasing your budget the way you have, and it's almost a double over the last 2 years, at what point in time do you actually have to take a look at the actual revenue that I assume is going down because of the pricing of the resource and our constraints on the resource, and yet your expenses continue to go up? Can you square that for me, please?
Well, I think right now that's a very difficult question to answer, just because of the disruption that we've seen in the sector across the board, not just in the petroleum sector, but in mining and forestry. I do think, though, we are seeing recovery. I think those rents will and revenues will increase. These are things that we pay attention to and monitor. And we will continue to do so. I think in a post-COVID world, as we see a return to a more normalized kind of economic performance, that would probably be the point at which we could look at those kinds of questions.
Well, do you see the revenues doubling as your budget has doubled, or is this the continued way that the government and each of its departments are going to continue to operate in surplus, huge deficit positions going forward?
Well, I frankly think that's a question the government will have to ask in terms of how it wants to allocate its resources. Certainly, I think in the current environment, the government has been making what it considers to be the necessary investments to preserve the sector and make sure that companies retain the liquidity that they need to kind of survive through COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. But let me say that the investments we're talking about here have nothing to do with the survival of the sector. Well, I'm looking at 77 million in plus another 9 million in the subseas that are for home retrofits. Can you tell me how many GHGs, greenhouse gas emission reductions, are going to be accomplished by 77 million? And if you're looking at that as a net number, that is the CO2 that's produced in the actual construction of the material for the home retrofits, and where you're getting your numbers, please.
Okay, Molly, I am going to turn that to you as the lead on that program.
So maybe I'll just say a couple of things. We can follow up with numbers after the meeting, but what I would like to share with you is that when we look at the climate plan and when we look at programs like this, part of it is the emissions reduction. Part of it is the economic activity and the jobs that are going to be coming and that are required to advance and to stimulate the economy. And so, so there's the economic development, there is the jobs element, and then there's the emissions reduction. But we know that each of these elements are going to be required to sort of tackle the 17% of emissions that come from our building stock in Canada. So to your question about the greenhouse gases from homes, that's what we're trying to tackle there. The emissions reduction fund piece that is also funded in here, we were looking at providing improved or better access to capital for those companies so that they could tackle their methane emissions during a period of COVID where they were facing specific issues. So each of them have specific outcomes that we're trying to achieve through that period. So, there are numbers that we're targeting with respect to emissions reduction, but at the end of the day, it's, when we try and pull all of these measures apart, it might not be one-to-one because it's all required to enable the transition that we're moving forward with.
Okay, thank you. I notice also the Canadian Energy Regulator increases their budget by a third year over year. And it seems to overlap with the Canadian Centre for Energy Information run by your department. And at what point in time here are we throwing money at the same problems through different departments?
Well, we pay a lot of attention to making sure that we aren't duplicating that spending and trying to make sure that the investments made by the regulator versus the investments made by the department are aligned and complement one another, but indeed aren't, they don't duplicate. And so I think that we actually do those reviews as proposals come forward, and as these increases have come forward. Those are the challenges we get from the center, from the Department of Finance, that they want that assurance, and I think that we can say, I think quite clearly, that the increases at the SIR aren't duplicative of the kinds of investments we've been making with respect to energy data and energy information.
Thank you, Mr. Tupper, and thank you, Mr. McLean. Okay, last person to ask questions today will be Mr. Lefebvre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank all the officials who are here with us today, and thank you very much for working with me. I very much enjoyed my experience as Parliamentary Secretary.
To work with all of you, the professionalism that we have at NRCan. It's and I had the opportunity to travel the world and to talk about Canada, and basically talented people like we have here is what makes our country so great, because of the stability that you bring in and the expertise that you bring in. Encore un gros merci.
Major thank you once again.
The importance of having a credible plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How important is that to the economy? I know, Mr. Tupper, you've been dialoguing with a lot of other officials from across the country, as well as industry as well. And certainly ESG, as we know, is certainly something that is top of mind. We're seeing it more and more. So in your view, why is that it's so important to have a credible reduction plan when it comes to lowering our carbon emissions?
Well, I think, things that we've been working hard in terms of the advice that we've provided to the government is to ensure that they see that dynamic in terms of what the energy transition is doing and what's happening kind of in a global marketplace. And the demand on us, when I've traveled leading trade delegations on LNG and on forestry and whatnot to Asia and to Europe, the demand has been, kind of what are you doing to make sure, as you referenced on ESG, that you've got the right combination of environmental, social, and governance frameworks that surround the sector. The sector makes up almost 20% of our GDP. It's I think 17% in terms of 2019 numbers. It makes up 48% of our trade balance overall. The vast majority of that going to the United States. But those are significant numbers, and that is, I think, why the department has been able to ensure that it is part of the climate solution, that we are actually bringing solutions to the table. We're not a sector that needs to have things done to us, but investing in carbon capture, investing in clean energy technologies, investing in technologies that help us reduce the greenhouse gas intensities of the production of a barrel of oil. Those are the things that will keep Canada competitive and allow us to continue to sell our product globally.
Thank you, and I fully agree with that. And now it's clear that maybe I want your opinion as well as truly the importance of having a properly funded regulator. Because I heard Mr. McLean talking about we just increased by 1/3 the funding of a regulator, but having a solid regulator, the importance that signals to the marketplace, that it's something that we take seriously. The importance of why if it's well funded, it does its job properly. What does a properly funded, well-working regulator do to the markets?
Well, it creates certainty. It creates transparency. It allows investors to know that where they put their money, that they are going to be investing in a industry that is well governed and that they can rely on. I think in terms of where our regulator is going at SIR, but I think frankly across the board for Canadian regulators. the growth of engagement, the way that we are engaging with Indigenous communities, the kinds of consultations that we're doing publicly. Yeah. These are things that are expanding budgets and are ensuring that we are addressing the social dimensions of the impacts in communities of these kinds of investments.
And that's important. And I like that with respect to Indigenous communities and engagement. I think I would like to finish maybe with that question. Maybe Mr. Labonte wants to jump in here. The importance of properly engaging with these communities. We saw from SIA 2012, the old regime that was there, and the difference. Maybe you can allude us to or share with us your view as to the difference between SIA 2012 and the impact assessment when it comes to Indigenous engagement, and why it's important certainly from a court's point of view, but just only for the right for just doing the right thing of engaging with Indigenous communities when it comes to resource development.
Jeff, why don't you jump in? You were at the coalface of that work.
Exactly. Sure. Well, I think there's maybe two
point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt at all, but today we're voting on the sub-C estimates. Is that correct?
I take objection with that, Mr. Chair. Listen, everybody had free reign on everything, and I'm talking about the regulatory process here, and I'm talking about the impact assessment. This is.
And I'll give you all the time back, Mr. Lefebvre, and I apologize. I just want to make sure that we know we're voting on the sub-Cs here at the end of the meeting before it's over.
And the main estimates. Let's allow Mr. Lefebvre to finish his questioning. And
it's okay. It's okay. Mr. Labonte, if you want to continue, please.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe there's two parts to this, and I'll do it in as an efficient a way as possible. So the first part was that the courts have been regularly telling the regulatory agencies, the government, and decision makers that meaningful two-way engagement is necessary for Indigenous issues to be adequately and sufficiently covered under the Constitution, Section 35. So in the TMX project, that was the redo in which the government put forward the plan and through a course of well over 9.5 months, worked through meaningful engagement of the 128 Indigenous groups potentially impacted by the Trans Mountain Expansion project. And in the SIA 2012 context, the government brought in a number of years ago the Impact Assessment Act, and in the Impact Assessment Act, the beginning of the process has for early planning, and that early planning involves significant engagement with Indigenous communities upfront and through the process as the proponent is developing and adequately developing their regulatory filings. And so the government engages with Indigenous communities to provide the capacity. The Indigenous communities are involved with the proponents, working closely at understanding the projects and the potential impacts, so that by the time that the project moves its way into the assessment phase, the level of understanding and the level of awareness of the issues and the engagement is well advanced, and such that the regulatory example, so in this case, the Canadian Energy Regulator has already developed a relationship, is already aware of the issues, has the information base in front of it, and the Indigenous communities have been part of the process well before the detailed examination of the project regulatory proposals are in place. And then that continues through the regulatory process, such that Indigenous communities are part of the regulatory process and are able to be heard, that the Crown side of the equation begins its consultations and further advances the meaningful two-way dialogue, so that any issues that come up can be accommodated, or they can be developed in a mitigative fashion through the particular recommendations that might be made by that regulator. So it's a much more comprehensive approach to how Indigenous engagement occurs, which is what industry seeks in terms of trying to identify the certainty and to know that through the process, that the conclusion of the process will provide as much clarity and certainty that they have with respect to the project they've submitted.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Okay, that concludes the time we have allocated today for questioning witnesses. I'd like to thank all of the departmental officials for taking the time out of their day to attend. Your patience, as always, particularly to those who sat idly by and were not put on the spot. We're grateful to you. We know you were ready, willing, and able. Just let me finish 1 second here. But I do appreciate it, as we always do on every occasion. Okay, Mr. Patzer, I believe that was you.
As Mr. Zimmer.
Sorry, just Zimmer. Sorry, it's challenging when you're not in the room or when you're not on the screen. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I don't believe we voted on combining the SUPs and the mains together. Shouldn't they be done separately? That's what the normal process is. So the fact that they're combined is news to this side of the committee in opposition. So I'm not sure where that came from. Thank you. Can you clarify?
Well, I can clarify. We did discuss it at the last meeting. It was outlined very clearly on the agenda. So it's not something
it
that
wasn't voted on, though, Chair.
Me.
So I'm not sure. Something like that would need to be a decision that the committee votes on. So I'm not sure who made that decision because I don't believe it was made in committee.
Well, look, the minister was invited to speak to both the main estimates and the supplementary C estimates. We did discuss that at the last meeting. We discussed it before.
We didn't vote on it, though, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
we don't need to vote on it. Sorry,
point
who's
of order,
Mr.
Now? Chair. Sorry, it's Jeremy here. I'm just reading from the Hansard back on February 26th. We put it to a vote on my motion that I tabled to this committee, and unanimously we voted to have the minister come for the supplementary estimates, and we voted unanimously for that. Not the main estimates, the supplementary estimates. That's why we put this motion forward today, was so that we could have him come back and comment on the main estimates, because we agreed unanimously as a committee that he come for the supplementary estimates before the end of March. And now we have until the end of May for him to come for the main estimates. So we need to deal with these in two separate times, because it's the will of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, and thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Nobody's disputing the fact that that motion referred to was dealt with and voted on, and the minister was coming to appear to speak to the sub-C estimates as a result of that motion. But subsequent to that, as with the passage of time, the main estimates became available, and he was invited to speak to those today as well. It's not a surprise to anybody. We knew in advance of the meeting today. We knew during the course of the meeting today. It was outlined in the agenda. So I'm
but Mr. Chair,
a little bit puzzled.
Point of order.
In any event.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Zimmer.
You know, the one thing I've been a chair of committee in the past, and you know, the chair is to follow the direction of the committee. And in this case, we clearly have not voted to have those two combined, to the minister to speak to the SUPs and the mains. It's been very clear. Mr. Patzer just outlined it in reference to Hansard. Very clearly, the minister was here to speak to the SUPs. So it's imperative, Chair, that you do what the committee is wanting you to do. And to have the minister appear on the mains is what we're asking. It's clear you can't make that decision on your own, Mr. Chair. That should be the decision of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, it's very clear to me what's being asked of. But what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to thank our witnesses again. I'm going to let them go, and I'm going to suspend, and we're going to go in camera and address issues we
Point of order, Mr.
Chair.
We'd like this addressed in public. Please address the point of order that's on the table right now, please. Thank you.
I've responded to your point of order several times, Mr. Zimmer.
Well, Mr. Chair, we need a decision whether you had consent to this committee to actually combine the two hearings on the estimates, the subs and the mains. And the committee did not give you that consent.
Okay, that's Mr. McLean speaking now. We talked about this in committee business at the last meeting 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. It was very clear to everybody on this committee at that time that we were going to be addressing the supplementary C estimates and the main estimates. There was no objection made to it at the time. We agreed to proceed on that basis at that time. And that's what we did today.
Mr.
And that's
Chair,
what the
it's
agenda reflected.
very clear, according to Hansard, that it was for the SUPs. Mr. Patzer has already talked about and referred to it clearly in Hansard. It was for the SUPs. It was for the SUPs. It was not for the mains. What you're saying is inaccurate,
That's a separate occasion I'm talking about. No, it's not.
It's inaccurate,
Mr.
sir.
Zimmer.
No,
it's not.
Because Mr. Patzer quoted from Hansard. That's what was said. That's in Hansard. That is what it says.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
That is clear.
Mr. May.
I understand, you know, what's going on here, and I think, you know, Bob's argument is based on the original motion. What you're referring to was an agreement, and I'm wondering if the clerk can maybe step in here and say whether or not a vote is required when there's an agreement amongst the committee, which there was. I clearly remember in the last committee business piece. But I agree with you, Mr. Chair. With this, we should be moving this in camera.
Well, I don't agree. Point of order, I'm sure. I don't agree with Mr. May that this is something we move in camera. If you want to let the witnesses can leave, of course, but the committee business is still happening as committee business. Let me say, Mr. Chair, that it's been an unusual year, and the minister himself has had an unusual year, and he wasn't here for some of the other supplementary estimates. So I think it does give him the opportunity to come before this committee one more time, and he should take advantage of that opportunity. This is Parliament, and we need to still function as if we are Parliament. So in as much as this, to my understanding, should require consent from this committee to have the two combined, I don't think it received that.
We did, Mr. Chair, and I'm wondering if the clerk can confirm that, please.
That's what I'm waiting on right now. And just, Mr. McLean, just in response to that, we are proceeding as Parliament. We are proceeding in Parliament, not as if it is, but we're actually doing that. The minister has always been very generous with his time and willing to make himself available as anytime requested. And on occasions when he hasn't been requested, the one time, and it has been an unusual year, nobody will disagree with that either.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, quickly.
Allow me to finish, Mr. Patzer.
Okay, for sure.
When the minister was not able to come, we all know it was for personal reasons because of family matters, and nobody, and I know I include you and all of your colleagues in this, holds any ill will towards the minister for that, but the circumstances were such as they were. But regardless, he has been always willing to come. We can deal with this in camera. I'm happy to have a discussion with it. I will listen to Mr. Patzer, and then I'm going to suspend while we go in camera.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that, again, going back through Hansard to our last meeting, when you addressed us all at the end of the meeting, you said to discuss estimates. You did not clearly say main estimates. You just said estimates. You left it vague, so we did not have the clarity that we were going to be discussing main estimates. And the motion that we unanimously voted on as a committee, every member, was for the supplementary estimates. And that was why I asked for a vote on it, was to make sure that we were voting on just the supplementary estimates. Okay, and last time, again, you did not specify main, you only said estimates. Hansard indicates that as much.
Yeah, and again, I don't think we're disagreeing on what the motion said or the outcome of the motion, Mr. Patzer. So let's suspend and we will go on camera. Thank you to our witnesses.